So today I'm joined by John Wiltshire, founder of Addictive Pixel. Morning, John.
Hi, morning, Simon. How are you?
Morning. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, all good, thanks.
Excellent, excellent. So, John, you describe Addictive Pixel as taking fashion into the fourth dimension. So tell us a little bit more about what Addictive Pixel does.
I'll give you a tiny bit of history. I've spent all of my career in the advertising industry, mostly on the production side of things, so creating the ads that you would see. And I've worked directly with advertising agencies as well as production companies over the years, setting up internal production companies for them in London and globally. And over the 43 years I've been doing that, coming in touch with a lot of different brands and businesses, as you can imagine. And in mid 2019, I worked for a small fashion brand and came up with a concept for them, which was based on creating digital environments to host what you would call maybe a traditional catwalk show. And it was something that I've started to focus on and really sort of revisited early this year after COVID and lockdown, because you can imagine you couldn't get a bunch of models or, film crew into a studio during COVID. So revisited that, talked about it to a few key people in the industry, the fashion industry, and dedicated Addictive Pixel to this, even though I do have other interests, businesses, one in Australia, which is a digital production company, focusing on digital advertising. And that's what Addictive Pixel had been doing up until recently. And we still do that, and I still advise on that subject. And one of the main things I've done in the last 15, 20 years since starting my own business was help creative agencies understand what digital advertising was, because even though it's a commonplace, for all of us now, back in 2005, when I started the business, 2006, creative agencies didn't really know if they were wanting to get involved in it, because they were producing TV ads, traditional press, poster and radio ads, and didn't know if it was for them. But I convinced them it should be for them, otherwise specialist agencies would emerge, which they did. So I assisted quite a lot of agencies and brands to get into the digital advertising space. But when I started seeing what people call the Metaverse emerging, and I choose to call it the fourth dimension because it's the fourth dimension is anything beyond the physical. And if I do use the word Metaverse, and I'm working with somebody currently actually, helping them with their consultancy business, which is basically demystifying the metaverse. And this is what I did with digital advertising, was demystify it. That was kind of the role we played there. And the fashion industry was, seen to be taking advantage or being very active in the metaverse. And I try not to say the metaverse, I try and say metaverse, because it's not one place. It's there are several, let's call them hosting platforms, that you can place what we call extended reality experiences on. So that might be a VR headset experience, which is hosted somewhere. Like in Web 2, you would have hosted a website which might appear to be three-dimensional, but is in its own right, just two-dimensional. Hence 2 and 3, I guess. But because the fashion industry was taking advantage of this more than any other, I sort of resurrected this concept. And the concept is that if it costs you a lot of money to create a set design and build for a catwalk show, I could create otherworldly experiences for fashion designers to showcase their collections within. And there are some examples on the website, and the website's pretty lean at this second because it's, as I say, it's something I resurrected over the last year. But basically, you're only limited by your imagination, as they say. So the two examples I show, one's very, I guess you could say, dystopian, dark and sinister, a bit Big Brother with the big speakers. And then the other is more colourful and utopian with the flowers, etc. But of course, you can't buy or shoot Carla lilies at 10 feet tall. But in 3D, of course, you can create what you wish.
Yeah.
And with the careful placement of cameras within a green screen studio, and the model, who's my daughter actually, placed in that green screen studio, you can then envelop them in any background you wish. But along with the, let's call it a simulated catwalk show in an otherworldly environment, on the same day as creating that catwalk show, we shoot high resolution stills. The video that we shoot is at 6K, which is probably beyond use, if you know what I mean, as in way higher than necessary. Okay. But it means that when we freeze the video, it means that the image is sharp, because I'm not shooting at a traditional 25 frames a second. I shoot at 50 frames a second. So again, when you freeze the video, it's sharper than it would be generally. One, because of the resolution, one, because of the frame rate. And then I play it back at 35 frames a second, which gives you a slight slow-mo feel, which I think enhances the experience for clothing, because, especially women's clothing, because it's more free-flowing. Yeah. The flow of the material is more graceful. Equally, and traditionally, not always, but generally, catwalk models tend to stride and step with a very staccato step, which looks kind of cool, except that when you're filming it with a fixed camera, that staccato stepping tends to have a very jarring effect on the image. And at the time of creating this concept, I watched a lot, continuously all day, catwalk shows. And I'd end up with a headache because I was continually seeing these images popping up and down. It was almost making me seasick. So I made a conscious decision to shoot a higher frame rate and slow it down. And I got the model to more of a gliding step than a staccato step. And because what I understand,
effective, John, because when I've looked at the videos on your website, and they're certainly very impressive. And yeah, so yeah, I do like the expert. Not that I'm an expert in fashion or filming fashion, but they certainly look very good from my perspective. And I like what you said there, John, about demystifying metaverse. So that sounds pretty cool to be working in that. So
yeah, I mean, I'd done the same for digital advertising, as I said, back in 2006. Yeah. Onward. And I think a lot of the time, when new things emerge, or new technologies, or new ways of doing things, or new ways of looking at something, it's often not new. Actually, it's using existing technology, but just thinking about the way you use it in a different way. And that's the creative element that I enjoy, I guess.
Yeah.
But the demystification, whereas a lot of people like to over mystify.
Yeah.
Shroud things in in smoke and mirrors when it's not absolutely necessary to do so. And I think if you can draw parallels to processes and practices and technologies that people already understand, the demystification, is a service you can offer.
Yeah.
And this is something that we're doing outside of just the fashion industry in this particular use function, I guess, for the metaverse. I mean, the metaverse has hosted several fashion shows.
Yeah.
But on the most part, those fashion shows have been promoting digital clothing, not physical clothing.
Okay.
But of course, once people have their digital self that will they will use as their vehicle around the metaverse at some point when it becomes what people imagine it's going to be, because at the moment it's not what people think it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's a sort of a light version of that. They can wear Gucci or Prada or Balenciaga or whoever they wish on their avatar that they choose to use. So yeah, that's something that we're involved with right now and have been for the last year or so.
Right.
Is that demystification?
What did you start out in, or start your own business, John? What did you do it yourself?
At the time of starting it, I was working for an advertising agency, a big global advertising agency, and digital advertising was coming to the fore, and they weren't particularly interested in looking into that. As I said, a lot of creative agencies, if not most of them, just wanted to focus on what they knew and what they did best. So I decided to set something up on my own to, again, demystify that space and help creative agencies and brands to take advantage of this new space and technology. And again, when we say digital, a lot of photography was digital already then and had been for quite some time. Videography had been digital then and had been for quite some time. It was repurposing it. It was creating images, ads in the correct format to be able to be played out on various browsers. And at the time, that was probably the biggest challenge, because you always had to create something to the lowest common denominator. And unfortunately, Internet Explorer still existed then. And it was by far the lowest common denominator. So if you can imagine an image, a graphic image with a vignetted background, like a sky from dark blue to light blue, and that gradation on the Internet Explorer, you couldn't have a gradation. It had to be flat. So it stole the creativity away from the creatives I was working with, because they had to work the lowest common denominator. So the reason for starting the business, I guess, to answer the question in full, is that because I could see it being an emerging area in the industry, and I always try and stay one step ahead of what's new. The only way really to convince people to use it was to start a business that assisted them to do so.
And has it proved to be everything you expected it to?
Yeah, I mean, on the digital advertising side, if I approach now, or even last year or the year before, a creative agency and said I could help you understand digital advertising, they'd look at me really, with a weird look and go, "Well, we know all about that," and it did. But of course, like anything that you're pioneering as being new and demystifying it, at some point everybody says, "Well, we know about that now." Hence the venture into demystifying the metaverse, or what metaverse means, and what experiences brands can create for their customers within that space, which of course would be a more immersive experience than you could in a two-dimensional space. That's it.
And on that note, John, who is your ideal customer? Who?
It would vary. I mean, it could be what I call bottom up or top down. So it could be a brand. He wants to get their brand into that space, and we could assist them to do so, along with with strategy, research strategies, etc. And then assist their incumbent creative agency to understand the space as well, so they can come up with concepts which are relevant to the content that's created, and then hosted on the various platforms that are available, which you might call Metaverse. I would call Metaverse an experience rather than a place.
Yeah, okay.
Because it's not one place. It may never become one place, but it would be hard to make big statements like that. Mark Zuckerberg would love it to be one place. Yeah. And hence that's why he changed the name of his business to Meta. But that's like me creating a car company and calling the car company Car, and assuming that everybody would buy my car because they assume it's the only one, or that all football games will be only played in Wembley globally.
Yep.
That will be the only venue. It's hard to imagine there will only be one venue. The technology to interconnect platforms at the moment is not there in its entirety, at least. And there has to be common technology for that to happen, until everybody agrees that, you know, HTML, for example, for websites or similar, of email, you know, there has to be a commonality to be able to interconnect with other platforms in that sense. But it's early days, and that's what excites me. Is how to enable ad agencies to help their brands, or brands help themselves and inform their agencies. So it goes both ways. Agencies and brands both are ideal clients. And agencies of many sorts, you know, not just advertising agencies, PR agencies, media agencies, etc.
Yeah. No, I like the way you've explained that John. You know, thanks for doing that. So, you know, you mentioned there about, actually, there sounds though there's not a lot of opportunities in the industry going forward with understanding metaverse a bit more. So, what do you see as the current opportunities in the industry?
The industry as a whole has always been sort of, when I say ahead of the game, they're always looking into new ways of exposing. We've been talking marketing and advertising, new ways of exposing, you know, a client's brand. You know, you may have heard the term experiential, which is more, you know, physical experiences. So it might be, I mean, you hear the term Red Bull, often people associate it with sport, or extreme sports especially, or soapbox races, but not everybody associates it with a sugary energy drink. Yeah, it's become much more than itself. And I think, you know, the metaverse will just be another vehicle. And let's say, for example, you know, a brand has given an ad agency a budget, and let's call that budget 100%. And that budget is split between favorable media output, content output for that brand. So let's say, for example, their target market watches a lot of TV, which of course not a lot of people do now, they stream it. You would put a lot of your money into TV advertising, let's say it's 50%. Digital advertising went past 50% spend somewhere around 2009, 2010, maybe even earlier. And it increased going, you know, because it's more accessible. It's where people live more often these days. And the metaverse, you know, when it comes to gamers, a game scenario, a live, you know, game where you can engage with your friends. And I ask my son a lot of questions about this because I'm not a gamer and he very much is. If you could call the early stages of the metaverse, this has been playing out since World of Warcraft 20 years ago. And it's an internet based on that type of experience. It's the new Web3 internet. So when it comes to opportunity, there's a huge opportunity there. It's understanding it and leveraging it. And I think the big mistake most people make when there's anything new, they try and use all of it. You know, they turn it up to 11 rather than understanding it well enough to just turn it up to the right number for them, because one shape won't fit all. And that's the fun part of it, is to see where an entry level is for a client, a brand. Some might say it's not ready for them yet, but there's plenty that they can do today, right now. And I always describe it like this, you know, a long-term event, let's say a marathon that you might plan to run in 9-10 months time, you have to start preparing now, even if it's stretching, just stretching and doing the odd 1, 2, 3K run, and then you work yourself up. But the advantage of preparing in advance for an event like that, if we're saying that Web3 and Metaverse in its entirety, or it's in the shape that people think it's going to be, won't be ready for a few years. But if you're stretching and doing those odd 5K runs and 10K runs and exploring the space now, when the final gun goes off, you're going to be on the elite line at the beginning of the race, heading off with nobody in front of you. If you don't start now and start preparing now for that event, when the gun goes off, you're going to be 3 hours behind the start line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if an elite runner can run the marathon in 2 hours, 1 minute and 9 seconds, which I think is the fastest ever. I've got it written down over there. I can't see it though, because I'm looking at you.
I think you're there.
I should have put it a big post-it note next to the screen. They're going to arrive at the start line about an hour after the elite runner finished.
Yeah,
they're already bathing in glory, and the people who haven't prepared haven't even started yet. So that's my analogy for you for
I think
starting and getting flexing, stretching, getting prepared.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right what you've said there, John, and that's something I always say to my clients that I work with as well is actually, firstly, be prepared, be aware of what's coming up on the horizon.
Definitely.
Looking forward, being proactive. Particularly, I think the analogy you mentioned there is similar to when we came out of COVID. I was advising my clients, don't wait until it suddenly opens up. Make sure you're prepared, and then you're ahead of the game.
Exactly.
And then the second message that I got from what you said there was actually just take it in bite-sized chunks.
Very much so.
Don't immerse yourself in it completely. Just
very much so.
A bit at a time that you can digest and test in your business and measure how that's working for you. So
definitely. I mean, we use the term test and learn a lot, especially in digital, because it is accountable. You can measure it. Some people say if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. I don't absolutely agree with that, but if the data you're getting is good data, you can certainly adjust. You deploy, you look at the data, you adjust and you redeploy.
Yeah.
Because whereas ad campaigns in the past, I'm talking a long while ago, used to run for 3 months, and then it would be a new campaign, and you watch the TV. Whereas now with digital, it's a continual, constant conversation with your customer base, and it's more a consistent and constant conversation. As I say, it's not change and then change again, but you're certainly adjusting it as you go along.
Right. So what's been the biggest learning for you, John, since you've been in business?
Evolve. I mean, I think you've got to, every day's a school day, right? I mean, that's given, but any idea that you may have had 20 years ago, or wherever you started your business, might have been a great idea then, but in context of what's happening now, you've got to make sure it's still relevant.
Yeah.
So evolve is the important thing. I think you'll find if you can still use your skill sets, because a lot of skill sets used to run a business are common to all, but making sure your product or service is still relevant to your client. And then the case in point, as you said, was COVID. How did we adapt when COVID came, when we couldn't go into our offices or studios or whatever? Yeah. Didn't affect us a lot because our business model was into our clients' offices and sit them next to the relevant person. So it might be an animator would sit next to a creative director or a designer or a typographer or a developer. But because all of our business is digital, and sharing screens is something we done for years and years and years, it didn't really disrupt us at all.
Yeah.
You know, it was a common practice. So that was not so much of a shock for us, as unfortunately it was for many others. And you know,
yeah, we've certainly learned a lot sort of through COVID, and yeah, and you know, I've read things that have said, you know, particularly in technology during that time, we've leaped forward probably at least 4 or 5 years.
Definitely
being pushed outside of our comfort zone. And I think the way that you and I are communicating now over Zoom is a prime example.
Well, we did. I guess we knew about Zoom before,
yeah.
But it became like you know, back in the 60s, 70s, you did the hoovering, right?
Yeah.
You didn't do vacuuming, you hoovered, whether you're using an Electrolux or, you know, a Hoover itself. You Google it, whether you're using Firefox or Safari.
Yeah.
You say, we Google it. And now you say, do you want a Zoom call?
Yeah.
And you say yes, but you end up on a Google Hangout or a Teams meeting. But often people use the term Zoom.
Yeah.
So it's become, you know, a buzzword. And as you say, technologies to allow us to communicate like we are now. And let's get to as close to a face-to-face situation as possible. And again, that's why the fashion thing, the catwalk concept came to front of my mind during COVID, because people couldn't go to catwalk shows.
Yeah.
But it evolved beyond that, really.
Yeah.
Apart from the fact,
the lateral thinking that you've had there in terms of how the environment has changed and will change going forward. So John, one final question that I'd like to ask you is what's the best advice you would give an 18-year-old you?
Oh, crikey. Several pieces of advice, I guess. I guess value your value, you know, don't underestimate your value.
Yeah.
Don't give it away for free. But I think, you know, you're understanding your environment, it changes, you know, things move on, and making sure that your product or service is relevant, as I said earlier. I think that's really important. You know, a business isn't one person. That's another one. You know, you need to employ or engage people who are better than you. A lot of people are afraid of that, and I think it's a strength. It's you know, you can't be everything. If I'm the only thing that I do is orchestrate and curate, that's as important to a business than anything else, because you're curating skills which you don't have, and you're then orchestrating those skills, and that's really important, because otherwise you're just an individual trying to do too much. That was more than one line, wasn't it? But that's the best I could do.
Great piece of advice, and yeah, perfect. Thank you. So, look, John, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today and sharing more about Addictive Pixel and your journey. So, thank you very much.
No problem.